Full screen this bad boy. Cool. How's the audio? Great.
Hello.
Hello, hello. How's it going?
Good. Late summer is really great today.
Oh, yeah, it's first time in the office for like 2 months. I don't have a US visa anymore, so the border guards give me a little bit of a hard time. Not like a huge one, but
Yeah, I was looking at my office badges because I was like cleaning up stuff after moving in. I think I have 7 of them. I have 7 office badges for different offices or different office buildings.
all right. I'm just
And
confirming.
one is, yeah, and one is for entry also to the Detroit office.
They can't get like, I guess having global be too much of an infrastructural challenge with all the
It's not so much a company issue. So the company could do it, but as we are renting places in other people's buildings, we kind of have to rely on what they're doing.
Yeah, right. Hey, Dave.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, how you doing? Nice guy. Dave, is that a virtual background or is that a real background?
It is, yeah. Belfast is not that nice. I can show you my real background. It's pretty. You'll see why I have a virtual one. It's pretty messy behind me. So there's like suitcases and bags and kids' toys.
Yeah, the virtual one is working well though. It's cool.
Yeah, it's quite good. The company, they've put ones together for all the locations, so you can kind of see Mountain View, Orlando. Yeah, there's like a bunch of them.
That's fun.
So it is kind of the Belfast skyline or certain buildings from it.
That looks like it's on fire. I wasn't sure if you were in an office and there was just like there was a wall directly behind you with art on it.
Oh, painted. Yeah. No, it's all fake.
Oh, cool. I could probably pick it off relatively soon. It looks like it may be a late turnout today. Got Justin here. Like, oh, actually, wait a few more minutes, I guess. Yeah, we usually have triple in until 5 after. Yeah. Hey, Dan.
Hey, how's it going today?
Wonderful. How you doing?
Not too bad.
Morning, Justin.
Good morning.
All right. Well, we could probably kick it off. As you can see, Todd and I are in the office today, so not at our usual spot, but hopefully we can still be effective here. Dave, I have you penciled in for Scribe for next time. Is that still good?
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, sorry, I have to jump off at 5:30, so thought it probably didn't make sense for me to do it today.
Cool. So James volunteered to do it. He's just going to do it paper and pencil style, and then come back and put it back. So if you don't see any updates, that doesn't mean we're not taking notes. It just means it's done non-traditionally, I suppose. So thanks, James. Appreciate it. Yeah, I suppose we could probably just go ahead and jump right into it. No newcomers today. We'll probably be relatively quick. So if there's anyone that has any topics, certainly feel free to add them. I think you guys all probably have the links, so I won't bother sending it to the channel. And yeah, I'll just go ahead and kick it right off. First one is we do have someone from Dynatrace that has volunteered to kind of act as like an OpenFeature social media manager. And that will basically just be like, right now she's opening up an issue in the community repo, and it's got like a date on it. And basically we can just add kind of noteworthy comments to that issue. And she's just going to go through and schedule some like periodic tweets based on that throughout the 2-week period. And then she'll do it open up a new issue after that. So just a kind of a simple way to get a couple, noteworthy items out there. And so if you have anything that's worth adding on there, please feel free to add it. Some examples are like, major spec releases, blog posts, anything like that, or conferences. So Todd, for example, is going to be at DevOps world, and so that's going to be one of the items that we'll talk about on there. So if you have any items, feel free to add that as a comment on that issue, and we'll make sure that it gets out there. I guess jumping right into it, one of the big changes that we've been talking about, and this has probably been a long time coming and probably was honestly a mistake when I first named the repo, but we originally created a Node SDK repo. That probably wasn't a good decision, honestly, and so we've been talking about probably turning it into the JS repo, and also looking at what it would take to make it so the SDK that we have now can run both server and client side, if that's possible, or if there needs to be a split. But at any rate, even if it was just server side, it still doesn't really make sense to have Node in the title, since it can work theoretically in Deno or Dino, I guess is how you pronounce it. Maybe even Bun and stuff like that in the future. So like specifying the runtime in the repo name probably doesn't make sense. So there's an issue open right now that kind of tracks what it will take to make that migration. GitHub actually does a pretty nice job also like redirecting and stuff once we do that name change. If you have any concerns, there is an issue open right now, kind of listing out what it's going to take to do that migration. Feel free to point out your concern there, and we can try to address that. But I think that's likely going to happen relatively soon. The only really noteworthy change about that is the publishing package name would change, meaning that you'd have to basically update to the new naming convention to receive new updates. So we'll try to make that clear in like the release notes, and we'll have to make let people know.
We'll deprecate the NPM.
And we'll deprecate the NPM package, so NPM would actually spit out and say like you're using a deprecated package, and then you can figure out how to get the latest versions. But that's just in the works, I suppose, and so hopefully we'll be available soon. So if anyone has any concern, I guess now you can talk about it too, or feel free to comment on the issue.
I know, Dan, I'm meeting with you later today about maybe some potential issues with the with just compatibility, just kind of to vet the launch directory SDK. So I think in general, we're going to do POCs and research just before we kind of do this change. But ideally, we'd have a shared interface, a shared set of interfaces between the web and the backend. I mean, I guess to Mike's earlier point, regardless of whether or not we use one set of interfaces in JavaScript between the web and backends, we still want to rename this one. But whether or not we end up kind of sharing those interfaces is another question. But we're
I'll probably take it to the GitHub issue also, because I have other questions on just naming it the JavaScript SDK, as you're kind of saying, with all the different runtimes. Like I know in our case, I don't think we work out of the box with Dino today. So it's going to get to be really interesting where OpenFeature is saying JavaScript SDK, but we might need different bindings or different platforms depending on that runtime.
Yeah, and we'll probably, make it have to, or be very clear on the read name, but like the naming convention of the repo, I suppose, sets us up well for the future. And so I think having that, the flexibility is nice, but yeah, to your point, like I tested OpenFeature briefly in Dino, and it worked, but obviously like then the providers would have to work and everything else too. So it's not just as simple as like the SDK works, it's the whole, everything, the whole ecosystem works, which is a little bit more challenging. So
especially with the JavaScript ecosystem.
Yeah, it's in a rough state right now, I would say.
When is it not?
All right, cool. Yeah, so yeah, feel free to just comment on there, but I think that is a good point for sure. And I think for now, I think we would still say Node is the the recommended runtime for what we've tested so far. But it does provide us the flexibility in the future for other runtimes. Cool. I'm going to skip just slightly around because I think we might lose Dave in a little bit. But one of the things that we wanted to do in terms of like obviously being ready for like KubeCon and that time frame, but also to kind of battle harden the specification, is to build providers. And so I've already created, and I showed it at the last community meeting, but there's a project board on GitHub that tracks providers right now. It's showing basically every company that's registered as like an interested party and a version for each SDK of a certain maturity level. So the one kind of noteworthy omission there is Python. That's not spec compliant yet, but the other ones are. So those ones, have all been, defined on that project board. And if we could basically start building out these providers, probably a recommendation right now would be to look at like the Java one. It's probably the most mature. It's got like some of the context stuff that Todd was just working on that I think he'll talk about in a bit. The Node or the JavaScript one is pretty far along, and that one actually would also be a great one because then we could start incorporating that back into the demo application. So we don't have to kind of maintain two separate versions. We can kind of use the official provider in that one as well. And the Go one is in good shape. The .NET one is close, but the context one that Todd will talk about in a bit, there's an OpenFeature right now, and that will change a little bit. So like you could certainly get started with building a provider, but there'll be a few things that will have to change in the relatively near future. So yeah, basically, I'm not a marketing person, but we could kind of brand it like Provider September or something, whatever you want to call it. But we're at a pretty critical part where we need to start building providers over the next month or so we can really test out, make sure that the spec has what we need in there, and that we won't need any like breaking changes post launch essentially. So, anything to add to that, anyone? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, do we need to kind of have, like, I guess I can probably chase a few people internally here that we can start contributing some providers, but like, is there kind of a list, or do we want to kind of get names down somewhere of who's going to do what, or is it just we come with this and see who can?
Yeah, actually, do you want to, Todd, can you pull up the board real quick? So there's a couple of ways to kind of get started with this. Todd, I'm just going to share the screen quickly. But basically, we have a project board to track it. So if you are going to work on one, just basically let us know. We can add the references to it and move it to like, the in progress column. So you can pull it up in just a second. Just go to the main org. And projects and providers here. Okay, cool. So you can see them all listed out here. All of the different, vendors that had signed up as interested parties are all listed up there, and they're all, different filters. You can also just click on one of the little tags there, the little pills there to apply that as a filter as well. But if you are working on one, just let me know. We can basically add all the tracking information and just throw it into like the in progress. And if you're even like planning on doing it but haven't started yet, we can throw it in just like that backlog section too, just to let people know. And then if it's someone, if it's a non-vendor that's going to implement it, so say like, I don't know, some community member wanted to do one for, Harness or Launch Darkly or whatever, I'm going to add in that community badge there. So we know that it's not like an official one, but it would be, it's better than nothing. So that was kind of the plan there. We do also, can you pull up the documentation real quick? So in the docs, we have some basic like recommended naming conventions now for providers. So go to docs, providers here. And so if you scroll down here a little bit, we have some like, recommended naming for like how it could look in, the different package managers, things like that. And then I guess now is probably a good time to pivot to the technology section, Todd, if you want to.
Oh, sure.
That quickly.
Yeah, so this is one of the topics for today, now that we're here, like Mike is saying. So we added this technology section. Earlier, this was just kind of links to these SDKs. Now it's a little bit more robust. So if you click one of them, you can see providers. There's actually a button to add yours, which just links to the other doc, but there's also kind of basically links to existing implementations. So this is the flag B provider. And then there's hooks as well. So it's really easy to, this is just a React component with like a couple really basic links and stuff to it. So you can open up a PR with your provider once you have it. They'll all be listed here for the appropriate language. If I go to Java, there's not a whole bunch here. I did just recently finish the flag D provider for Java, so we need to add it here. But yeah, that's basically how that works. You can go into the docs repo, which is here. This will redirect to it.
I think it stops up and feeding like the whole.
I guess we didn't. No, oh, that's in order, that's why. So yeah, the docs are here and you can see how to open up one of those PRs if you want, but it's just a couple lines of code to add your provider. So that's really, or your hook, that's really all there is for that one. I guess I can move on to the next thing I want to mention, which is I think this one, yeah, 51. So this is a big discussion, and I think it's worth quickly bringing up in this meeting. But basically, it was a proposal it was based on a discussion here, and then this is the associated PR. But essentially, what it does is it adds a abstraction for basically like a generic JSON node, and that JSON node can, like JSON, represent an array, a structure, or a primitive data type, or null recursively. And it's pretty similar to it's somewhat similar to what Launch Darkly has in terms of how they represent objects that are coming back from flag evaluations. But it's also similar to what Protobuf uses to represent their kind of deserialized objects in Java. So basically in strongly typed languages that don't support kind of generic object maps like JavaScript, we need this kind of structure to kind of represent object types coming back from flag evaluations. So you can see what it looks like here, but it's basically just a big object that can represent an arbitrary structure. And it's also going to be relevant for .NET. So I've been talking to Ben Evanson, who's not at this meeting today, I think he's on PTO, about doing the same thing in .NET. I think there's actually a draft PR open for that. So it's basically the exact same concept. So this should make it easier to do object value resolution in any provider in Java without introducing a whole bunch of messy dependencies on the consumer, like JSON or like a Jakarta JSON API implementation, something like that. So that's really all I have. I won't go through a demo or anything like that. You can take a look at the PR if you want, but it's fairly straightforward if you're familiar with Java. I think that's all I have to talk about today.
Yeah, and it's probably just quickly worth reiterating that the Node SDK will be following the same pattern. So it's the .NET one, thank you. So if you are going to implement a provider, just be aware that this change will be breaking. It should make it easier, but it's just one of those things that like it should be available soon, either at the end of this week or probably early next week, and then we should be pretty good to go there. Cool. Any comments on any of that? Perfect. Justin, I like the background. Nice. All right, cool. So this one's actually kind of interesting and I think a fairly exciting proposal. I just yesterday finished up an OpenFeature enhancement proposal for transaction context propagation. It's just at the proposal stage right now, and so I will put a link in the notes. Definitely check it out if you're interested. But it's kind of laying the foundation for passing or for supporting transaction context, which would basically live throughout the life of a single like request. Essentially, it's going to vary depending on the technology being used, the frameworks, and everything else like that. So the language will have to be a little bit vague, but I'd like to implement some proof of concepts in a couple different languages. This is not absolutely critical that we have it done by the by KubeCon, but it's one of those things that like I'm already actually using it in like the demo application because we were able to do it in Node fairly easily. And it is extremely powerful and definitely useful in certain situations. So if we can support it, great. If not, we should at least talk about some of the concerns, and we can start talking, see if there's any required spec changes. There shouldn't be. It should just be enhancements to the existing specification, and basically just defining like the merge orders and things like that. But definitely take a look if you're interested in that topic. I think it's a pretty exciting one actually, and definitely adds flexibility to people using tools that support things like thread local or continuous storage. And then the next one for me is OpenTelemetry. So circling back to the OpenTelemetry specification for semantic convention, that PR has basically been open since like May, I believe, and it's gotten some. It seems like a lot of the OpenTelemetry maintainers maybe don't fully understand feature flagging. There's been a lot of hesitation on that pull request. And so I did update it yesterday to try to clarify like what I thought was the value being added here, and try to even like visualize what a trace would look like, and try to break it down as much as possible. If this is an area of interest to you, please check it out. Maybe even just add a comment of support or an area that I could clarify, because I think it's basically at risk of potentially being closed if we don't get a little bit more, I guess, broad, community support for the concept. So yeah, definitely feedback there would be very, very much appreciated. And we'll try to add a link to the notes here too, if you want to just go directly to the pull request. That's it for me. Any questions on those topics? Cool. Looks like Sky, you have a couple points.
Hey guys, so I just wanted to point out that we've released a blog post on how to create a hook for the Golang SDK. I'll just paste a link into the chat. If anyone has any feedback on it, I'm always happy to hear it. And it would be good if we could get some more blog posts of this nature. It's just kind of like a step-by-step tutorial that someone could take if they wanted to create a hook. And following on from that, I think the next blog post I'm going to write is a tutorial on how to configure a logger for the Golang SDK. And we've actually got a pull request open right now for the Go SDK implementation. The approach we've gone for is to use the existing logger API, which is effectively an open API that anyone can integrate with their logger, and there's already plenty of integrations with most of the popular loggers in the Go community. So this allows any application authors to just tie in their favorite logger, and by default, if they don't configure a logger, it will just fall back to the standard Go log package. I'll paste a link for that in the chat as well. If anyone has any feedback or anything they think could be a better approach to this, then we could talk about it now, or feel free to add some comments.
Yeah, I think in general, logging feels like a kind of orthogonal type concern, like a side concern that I don't think we want to spec out, but we should. I mean, I think any SDK needs to think about how they're going to do logging. I know Justin's approach with Java was to use SLF4J, which I think is a pretty good interface, pretty generic and well adopted. So I'm okay with that. But yeah, I think that's the kind of approach we need to take, is just do the idiomatic thing for the language in the SDK, keeping in mind people don't want to always just throw things to the standard out. They usually have a logging solution in their application that they'd like to be able to inject or customize. So I think that's in general the right approach.
And if anyone thinks of any more kind of potential candidates for blog posts, then you can create an issue in the docs repo.
Perfect, cool, thanks, Guy. I mean, that's it for topics. There's one thing that I'll circle back to, but I just want to open it up and see if there's any other topics that people like to discuss. Okay, cool. So I guess just like the last, this is like an action item from the last one. Unfortunately, I don't have a great update yet. But basically we need to figure out like what we want to have basically released in the version 1 of the spec, and what that represents. And so I've been trying to work on the language for that. And from my perspective, ideally, and this is also why like creating as many providers as possible over the next month or so is very important, but we want to make sure that when we do like the 1.0 release of the spec, that the like application like developer interfaces are stable at that point. So that would be part of like the guarantee there, that we're not going to just completely change what that, what the customer facing touch points look like. We can kind of talk about what it would mean from like a OpenFeature SDK to provider interface, like what that means, because technically like as long as we keep them in sync and kind of document like the version's requirements, like we could probably get away with some breaking changes there. Obviously, I think we want to keep that minimal because as you see from even just that, the GitHub project board, like there's over 60 issues on there. That's a lot of providers to update. So I think, not introducing breaking changes is going to have to be a goal, but, is that something that is a hard requirement? That's something we can kind of debate about. And once I create that issue, certainly, or now, bring up your opinions on that. Like I said, I think we're going to avoid that where possible, and we need to avoid it where possible, but do we have an opportunity to do it, I guess, and that's what we want to probably define in our goals there. I'd also say that this should also encompass everything required to do majority of feature flagging use cases. So like whatever that is, and I think we're basically there from a spec perspective. Like you can do virtually like any required, like I'd say probably like 90% of the use cases I've seen with feature flagging. There are probably more advanced ones that you couldn't do, possibly like, bulk evaluations and some of the eventing stuff. But, core feature flag use cases, I think needs to be covered with our spec. And we also, I think what would want to make sure that we say, we are allowed to add features to this. This is not like we're freezing, the spec, like there's no additions. I just think we would want to make it very clear that we're not going to introduce, breaking changes to certain pieces.
So, Mike, what do you think if we go like over that list of 60 and reach out to the contacts that we have to get an idea what is really realistic for KubeCon?
Okay. Yeah, I'll see what I'll see what I can do there. Yeah, for sure. And I think like once we have confirmation for certain ones, I'll try my best to track it on the board. I think the hard part about the current setup is I don't think it's going to be easy for others to maintain, which is going to be kind of a bummer. Like I don't think from a permission on GitHub perspective, I can easily have others like kind of maintain their own state on the board. So that may be a challenge. But yeah, if you do, especially for the vendors that are on the call here, if certain providers are going to be built, let me know, and we'll just make sure to tag it and move it appropriately. And then I'll try to figure out who contacts are on the remaining ones and see if there's interest there. If not, we can just open it up for the community to see if someone wants to build and release it. And then, like I mentioned, we'll just tag that appropriately to make sure that it's clear that it's not like a vendor supported one. And it will also be represented like that, I think, on the docs page as well, to make sure that there is there's some way of distinguishing between like an official one and one that's community supported. So. Yeah, and I think we can also work with David that he can help. I mean, it's 60 providers like that. That's a lot. And maybe some of them are not even aware what we are planning. So I think it's good to reach out to them anyways, because not everybody's joining all of the calls. Yep, absolutely. I know that there's a few in the works already. So I've talked to Split about it and CloudBees. And then we have, Harness and Launch Darkly on the call today. So as long as they're aware of it and I guess let me know and see what they're able to commit to. I know it is a, you know, kind of a big commitment. Hopefully they're relatively easy to build, and certainly let us know if there's any challenges that you run into, but
Well, also the most relevant provider for every vendor is generally they'll know, right? Like they'll know what their most popular languages are and stuff like that. So that could give them some guidance in terms of priority. You know, like the .NET may be more valuable for one vendor than another, depending on their customer breakdown. Obviously, we want to get as many done as possible, but they may be able to kind of intelligently decide which providers they want to write based on their own metrics.
yeah.
Yeah, which I think is fair. And I think OpenTelemetry had the same issues where it eventually they ended up with the metrics, like keeping them all in sync. Who supports what? Because obviously, depending on your use cases, you might say, well, I'm more or less focusing on the front end part and the back end part. And it's totally legitimate if this is what the tools primarily used. I unfortunately have to jump, follow up on the rest. But good to be back.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Eloise. See you later. Okay, I mean, I think that's more or less all the topics that I had on the agenda. It looks like that's all that has been added as well. So,
Sorry, just a real quick kind of add on to that kind of last one. I mean, it's different, but just when you're talking about the spec and then the providers, I was kind of thinking like if you look at ourselves like Harness and LaunchDarkly and a lot of companies, they tend to split provider or split the SDKs as client side and server side. And I was kind of thinking that, like, I don't think we account for that anywhere in the spec, or we call it out. And from an API point of view, it maybe doesn't matter, but I'm wondering, do we need to fit that in somewhere? Because I guess there's kind of maybe an implication in terms of performance or the application consuming that provider, like what that might do. I think what we find most customers, most people don't really care or get the difference between server side or client side. They kind of want to pick the language first, but there may be some where it matters.
I have some concerns about the mobile world. Specifically, I talked with the mobile engineers at eBay, and they're not going to use the Java SDK for Android. They're like, we only want a Kotlin one. And they'll probably use a more modern version of Java than we use on the server side. And I'm not yet sure that we're adequately representing mobile concerns in the spec. And so I'd really love any like vendor hard-earned knowledge there around mobile stuff and if we're ticking all the right boxes.
I can jump in from the LaunchDarkly side. I mean, to me, what we've been looking at so far, and I thought it was kind of determined, was more server-side use cases. Mobile is definitely a different setup entirely. I guess from an interface perspective, it may not be as big. Like for our SDKs, though, it is because of battery concerns and other background pieces there. So as far as open features go, no, I haven't really dug into how that fits the mobile world.
yeah, I think for now, like, it'd be nice if we could make sure to take into account some of those requirements, just to make sure that like we're like back to like locking in a spec or something, and we're not shooting ourselves in the foot there. But as long as, you know, I think for now, we could just say like mobile is more or less out of scope, and likely client is, unless we can figure out something relatively easy. And that's something, you know, part of the research that we're looking at even later today, just to see, you know, if it's something we can support with, you know, minimal changes based on the spec that we already have, it's something we could at least make available. And if it requires more work, then I guess we'll have to, you know, kind of break that down and see what it's going to take. I really want to avoid locking in the spec if this is going to introduce breaking changes. So that's my main concern there. I don't think it's a big deal to say mobile is out of scope for now, though, in terms of SDKs and stuff.
As far as the web client, like I was mentioning earlier, that's something we know that web is a big one. So I think in terms of priority, the web is a bigger one than mobile. I really would like to kind of suss out some of those things with web. So I'm looking forward to the conversation, the meeting that we're going to have with Dan, but then maybe that'll elucidate some things that you know, could help us either know what we need to change in the spec or know that the spec is good for the wider community. But If you have any specific concerns, Dave, feel free to start a discussion or find a relevant discussion. I could kind of point you towards some that exist on GitHub now, I think, but without being too hand wavy, the hope with the web with the Java SDK is that JavaScript SDK, pardon me, is that basically you just register a different provider. So you'd have like a web client provider for Harness and a backend JavaScript provider for Harness, and you would just register the different provider that wraps the appropriate SDK in the appropriate context. And really the only things really that are happening as far as the OpenFeature SDK goes are just vanilla JavaScript stuff. Now we may be missing, parts in either the JavaScript SDK or in the spec to do that efficiently, while even considering things like the reality of the different runtimes, like the browsers, the browser being minimized and stuff like that. What impact that could have even on battery life if you're using the browser on mobile. There's a whole bunch of different concerns there to think about when we think about web, but the idea is at least the interfaces hopefully are the same.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think for what they probably are. There's maybe not much. Like maybe there might be some additions. Maybe there's something around injecting local caches or whatever. But I think I don't think there'll be anything breaking. I was just wondering more. For the provider developers, do we need to kind of have some kind of indicator or type in there where they can indicate what it is, so that if you're loading that up, if you pick that provider, kind of what it's doing. It's kind of offloading its evaluations remotely, or it's doing them all internally in your.
Yeah, but the SDKs, most of or all of them available right now do say like server side flag evaluation, and then I guess once that like JavaScript renaming happens, we would just make it clear like how the different client versus server side would work and install instructions and things like that. But right now, yeah, it's basically all server side and just on those few technologies that we've talked about.
Yeah, to your point, Dave, we could maybe do some research about how to kind of alert people. Maybe there's some tooling we could leverage in NPM or even at runtime to kind of like say, hey, like you may have registered a backend provider in the front end or something like that. I don't know what solutions there are for that. That's something we could kind of research just to put up some guardrails.
Yeah, and I think that's all fair. Like, and we probably don't want to overprotect people as well. Like I think you want people to kind of know what it's doing and the impact that it may or may not have. I think I just know from sort of conversations we've had, quite often this kind of topic gets confused, and somebody's planning to put what's probably quite a heavyweight bit of processing code into a front end, which isn't ever going to end well. But hopefully people are doing enough research with this that they know that's what they're doing.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. Yeah. Any other topics? All right, thanks, Dave. Yeah, I mean, if there's nothing else, I guess we can just go ahead and wrap up. Definitely keep an eye out for that proposal. I'm going to try to wrap that up as soon as possible, and then feel free to provide feedback on that. But that should help kind of set the stage for at least the hope for KubeCon that we're going to work towards. And or at least around that time frame in terms of what a spec or where we'd like that spec to be by that point. And a lot of it does come back to just making sure that we kind of battle harden it with providers and trying to use it for different test cases. And that's where blog posts maybe are good ideas, all that type of stuff. So really experiment with it and make sure that it's working as kind of intended. Other than that, I think we're probably good. Yeah, ping me on Slack if you need anything. See you on GitHub.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
All right, have a good one. Talk to you later. See ya.